Hey, this is Troy Erickson from copywriting.org. And today we have another awesome interview with another copywriter who's on copywriting.org and has come on here to share a little bit about what it takes to make 150 grand a year as a copywriter. Because let's face it, a lot of copywriters, that's like the dream, right? Make six figures, but what does it actually take? And, there's a lot of things that happen in your life and in your story that are crazy. And there's a lot of things that are like tactical tips that can really help too. So we're going to talk about both. So I'd like to welcome Tobias Allen to tell us a little bit about himself and some advice he has for a copywriter who wants to make 150K a year.
Cool. Thanks, Troy. I appreciate it. So everyone, so I'll kind of start from the beginning. I picked up copywriting based off a copywriting book. So I found it in the bookstore. And what then happened was, at the time I was looking for work. So I used the concepts to more or less pitch dozens of business owners. I basically used the cover letter as a CV, and each of these cover letters was essentially a sales letter. So they looked a little bit strange, but it went from a point where I wasn't really getting any response to it started working. And I found that I became quite skilled at essentially booking meetings with business owners off of cold emails and things like that. And then it just more or less snowballed from there. So today, as you kind of mentioned, I passed the six-figure mark as a copywriter. I work with a handful of, I guess you'd say, blue chip clients. And I do everything from email to sales pages and VSLs. And then I also help with cold traffic on the front end and working with funnels, doing anywhere from conservatively, the huge numbers. I'm not gonna
Now, to be fair, for anybody who's listening, like Tobias, he wants to stay under the radar, but I had the chance to hear some of the people he's working with, and I'm very impressed. So I'll just leave it at that. But could you talk a little bit about, you said you got really good at cold emailing and client acquisition, and what are some things that you would recommend for newer copywriters to get clients? Because a lot of people are like, man, I tried cold email before and it didn't work. And for me personally, I'm like, hey, you got to do more volume and you got to get really personal. But what do you think?
So I agree with the personal side of things. One of my pieces of advice is do something wildly different from everyone else. So my cold emails were like 5 pages long, where a lot of people might say like do a couple of paragraphs. I very much leaned into the personalization side of things. And for instance, I was working in the real estate niche at the time. And to give you an idea of what I did was I created essentially this email script that I think was around 10 pages if I were to copy and paste it into a Google Doc. And I templatized it. So the hit rate on that thing was like 80% cold email. So for every 7 I would send out, I would book like 5 meetings. And that, like, it was crazy. So yeah, in terms of cold email, it does work. You just have to make sure you're reaching the decision maker and you're putting the right message in front of them.
Yeah, now that's pretty cool. So one thing that always stands out to me is when I open a cold email, because I get a few, it's like I can tell right away if this person is using some kind of software, if it was copied and pasted, or if they actually researched me and it seems personal. So for you to write that long of a message, like how much research did you do on each person that you reached out to?
So the first one, quite a lot. And that kind of gave me like the pain points and things to hit on. And then that was kind of the core sales argument. The only thing that changed, I put a number of tactics in there. So one example I can share is I got, where possible, I found the founder's face or the person's face on the internet and essentially copied and pasted that into the beginning part of the email. And I got a red circle, circled their face, did an arrow and said, this is an important message for this guy. And that was how I was reaching decision makers. So it didn't matter if I was sending it to a support at company name or help at company name. Quite often the secretary passed it on up the chain if that was the case, if I couldn't get the person's main email address, which you can typically find these things using something like Hunter or just with a little bit of creativity.
Yeah, it's I would say the key for me to summarize it into a sentence or two is when you send the email, people are when they receive it, they're skeptical and they think that, okay, this is a copy and paste job. But what's the one thing you can put in the email where they go, all right, that is not faked. They personally did that. And their picture with a big red circle and arrow around it, that for me would tell me that they actually did their research. Now, next question. So you got their attention and you're booking a meeting with this person. What was the offer that you made to them toward the bottom of your email that made them want to book?
So essentially the hook was pretty much identical in every email. It's like, did you know you're missing out leads on your business? Something like that. And then I basically just showed proof of reasons for that. So in terms of the target list of companies I was aiming for, it was essentially companies not advertising on Facebook. And it was very much like, in terms of like a typical copywriting formula, it was problem, agitate, solution. I'd highlight that problem for them. I'd basically make them feel it. In certain instances, I would show, there were two templates. Some instances I would show a direct competitor was running ads and they weren't. And then the offer was like, just let's have a chat. So I wasn't trying to sell an email, it was just booking the appointment.
Perfect. Very simple.
Yeah, it worked. It worked really well, actually. I sold the template to a copywriter for like $400. So
now, who are some of your inspirations? You mentioned that you read a book when you started out, and maybe you have more inspiration since then, but I'm kind of curious now.
Yeah, so probably the typical stuff that a lot of copywriters might have heard from. So Gary Halbert, Dan Kennedy, Eugene Schwartz, essentially all the big names. I kind of geeked out over copy. I did like the handwriting stuff. I went pretty intense with it. So yeah, I just went down that rabbit hole. And I guess that was just part of the process for me.
Awesome, man. Yeah, you definitely sound like a student in the game, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Now, after you get somebody to book an appointment with you, you're talking to them. What are some of the things that come up during the appointments? Whether it's like, wow, that's really cool, or maybe they're objecting to something. And what was the offer that you pitched them on when you were talking to them?
Yeah, so good question. For this real estate example, I was fortunate that it's quite high ticket. So honestly, like when I walked in, it was, I think because the email was so good, the person was more or less sold. I didn't have to have this long, extensive sales meeting with the typical structure of like building rapport and stuff. Honestly, it was just going in and saying, do you want this or not? I wish I could say I was like some amazing salesman, but honestly, the email had done a lot of the heavy lifting for me. And in one instance, when like I couldn't necessarily justify the price in the meeting, I basically then sent him another email that pitched him. And his response was like, it's a good pitch, like send the invoice over. So I rely quite heavily on written word. And that's one of the reasons why clients pay me, basically.
Now, obviously, you said you've written a lot of different kinds of copy, but have any of these clients who've closed said, I want you to do for me what you did to me? So they saw your cold email, they got it, and they're like, this is amazing. Can you also write cold emails for me, or is it all like funnels and warm traffic?
So yeah, I have done. So from a copy side of things and from just experience, one of the things that I decided early on was getting as much experience as possible. So where there was copy, I decided to essentially get experience. So I built cold email systems for a number of people, using things like Lemlist and scraping leads off of LinkedIn. I don't necessarily enjoy it, I have to admit, but essentially, yeah, like when I said I was a student of copywriting, one of the things I did an example is like I read in a Dan Kennedy book that direct sales helps improve your copywriting. So I got a job door knocking, and I did that for 2 weeks to see like when you knock on someone's door, what are the things you can say to start a conversation. And a lot of what I do is like look at sales and how to essentially apply that.
That's actually hilarious. So you intentionally got a job knocking doors just for 2 weeks so you could go undercover and study people.
Yeah, basically. Yeah. And I think so at one time, because I've written a lot of Facebook ad scripts as well, which obviously for a cold audience is like, what are you going to say to get their attention? And at one time I was writing like 60 plus scripts across like a dozen companies. And I'll be honest, like the offer was very similar. And I was just running out of ideas at this point. So at one point, like these companies were scaling quite aggressively and they needed like loads of creative. So at one point it was just a testing factory of throwing things out of wall and seeing what stuck. It's just very quite useful. So yeah.
Now you mentioned that cold is not necessarily your favorite to set up for a client, but what forms of copy do you enjoy most and like what niches?
I think ecom for the last recently at least has been a bread and butter. So like ecom email marketing was definitely a very attractive niche for me. I found it very easy because it's just very easy to look at the results of your copywriting. Everything, so Klaviyo is kind of the dominant ESP, email service provider. And if you can get a hold of someone's email account, you can both write the copy for ecom products, which is fairly simple. And in addition to that, everything is tracked. So it's a very good testing ground to be able to level up your skills quite quickly.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing all that. Now, and I really mean this. I think at some point, if you're comfortable with it, you should 100% put yourself out there more. And I think you would have a great personal brand. I really do. With all like the clever creative things that you almost remind me of Sean Ferris a little bit. He definitely gets weird online, but in a good way that gets people's attention. So
he's a cool dude, actually. He's got a decent program. Yeah, Sean's cool.
So great work so far, Tobias. Now, if somebody wants to contact you, whether they're like, dang, that was impressive, I want to hire you, or maybe somebody is like, yeah, I wouldn't mind hearing more about how you've hit 6 figures as a copywriter. Should they email you or what should they do?
Good question. I hadn't really thought that far ahead, to be quite honest. To be honest, I'm not taking any more client work as it is. I'm turning people away. So yeah, I'm kind of unreachable. So that's very useful. Yeah.
What I'll do just in case is I'll link to your profile on copywriting.org. So if somebody wants to read a little bit more, maybe email you, they can if they want to. But in the meantime, this man is busy. He's booked because he's a beast as a copywriter. So Tobias, thank you for coming on here and sharing a lot of underground knowledge.
Cool. Cheers, Troy. I appreciate it.
Yep. Have a good one. And for everybody else listening, this is Troy from copywriting.org. So make sure you check out the site and all the amazing interviews that we have.